Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today we are joined by Ray McGovern, a CIA officer for 27 years, who chaired the national intelligence estimates and prepared the president's daily brief under President Reagan. And given that we'll talk today a bit about the U.S. intelligence community in this war against Iran, can't think of anyone better to speak with. So, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Glenn.
So, over the past week plus, we had the Iran war. I think it began with, of course, a surprise attack on Iran's nuclear facilities during negotiations. Then we were told that Israel acted alone. Then we were told that the U.S. was actually backing it. Then Trump said he needed 2 weeks to give, I think, diplomacy a chance or make a decision. Then there was another surprise attack. Then we're told, this was only an attack on nuclear facilities. I think J.D. Vance even said it was a war on the nuclear program, not it's nothing regime change. Then Trump says this is we need regime change. So then of course Trump says no ceasefire. The U.S. demands complete surrender of Iran. Then he says mission completed and calls for a ceasefire. And of course, now he's a peacemaker. He's the one bringing Iran and Israel together to bring peace. He's not part of the conflict, apparently. It's a very confusing week of war. So much deception and empty words. So I know, Trump can be very difficult to predict, but what do you predict then, or see coming here? Because this is just I don't know any other conflicts or war, similar to this. So how do you make sense of this all?
Well, Glenn, I've been around a lot longer than you have, and I haven't seen anything like this either. Trump is the very personification of unpredictability. So all we can do is review what happened recently, as you just did very, very nicely, and project from that and try to figure out what makes him tick. Is he somewhat deranged now? Are we having now a second president that is mentally impaired, this time by impulsiveness and hubris and kind of delusionary thinking? My God. My shtick, of course, has been watching Soviet and Russian leaders, um, and there's nothing they fear more than an unpredictable president of the United States. Now, just to try to parse some of the rhetoric that went on over these last few days, you artfully noted that J.D. Vance said we're not at war with Iran. We're just at war with Iran's nuclear program. God, well, as an old Catholic, now I know that there are distinctions you could make. Aquinas would have a ball with this one. What does it mean to be at war with Iran's nuclear program? Give me, give me a break, And then J.D. Vance said, "Oh, and it's not. It doesn't have anything to do with regime change. Now we don't do regime change." And then you have the president get immediately. What it's that? Hong Ding wrote this Truth Social. Said, "Wait a second. Now, what's wrong with regime change? It's wrong. Oh, I know it's wrong. Uh, it's politically." What's the word? Incorrect. Okay. Sort of like using the wrong pronoun, for God's sake. So what Trump goes on to say is, look, regime change, if the Iranians don't come around, why not regime change? I mean, let's make Iran great again. Yeah, that would be a good slogan. I mean, so this is the level of thinking. I mean, need I more add, but need I add more? Where you have Marco Rubio, who is not only the Secretary of State now, but the head of the National Security Council as national security advisor to Trump. Two hats. There was only one person who could wear those two hats successfully, and that was Henry Kissinger. And I don't think I exaggerate to say that Marco Rubio is no Henry Kissinger. Okay. So what does he say on CBS Sunday? Meet the Press. Well, Margaret Brennan, who's a good interviewer, although she's been always guided by political correctness, with respect to Iran, unless she has not for offline, all of a sudden she says to Rubio, "Oh, the intelligence community says that Iran has no nuclear weapons program. Don't you realize that?" Well, no, that's what they say. Of course, that's what they said. And actually told Rubio, no, 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 that's not what. No, no, you're wrong. You don't know. Yeah, it became a kind of a food fight between sophomores in high school in the cafeteria. For God's sake, no, no, it's not. I mean, it was sort of like, gosh. So I won't say adolescent, it was sort of juvenile. And of course, she was completely right. Now, I cite that just to prove that things are changing in this country. Margaret Brennan would not have been emboldened to hold Marco Rubio accountable for this idiocy. He finally says, it doesn't matter. Intelligence doesn't matter. My God, So it's really flying off the handle here in these United States of America. I think that the backdrop to all this is, and I would say thankfully, strategically now in this new world, it's 2 against 1. I feel very close to this issue because my first portfolio was to watch Russian relations with China and how they impacted relations with the U.S. and this triangle that we have to talk about. The Russians on one side, the Chinese on the other, and the U.S. in the middle. It used to be kind of equilateral, right? No more. It's isosceles now. You have the big arm for Russia, a big arm for China, and the U.S. sort of, U.S. doing not much in the middle. And this has major consequences. Now, I'm virtually certain that after the Iranian foreign minister talked to Putin yesterday, that they got their ducks in a row. They checked with the Chinese and gave an ultimatum to Trump. Look, this is the new world. Forget about doing it anymore. Um, the Israelis are beginning to hint that they would be susceptible to a ceasefire. That's because they're losing. You hear that, Mr. Trump? They're losing. Iran has a plethora of these hypersonic missiles against which your Patriot missiles and your HIMARS and all of the very fancy, sophisticated defenses that don't work. You know that, Mr. Trump. I hope they told you that, right? So let's see if we can tap this thing down. Why don't you try to get a ceasefire? See if the Israelis will buy into it because they've taken it on the chin. Nobody knows that. ABC and Reuters just been kicked out of, or just been told, look, you can't transmit out of Israel without censorship. Al Jazeera, of course, is already gone. So Americans don't know how badly hurt the Israelis are, but they are badly hurt. And there is no defense against this slew of very sophisticated hypersonic missiles that Iran can use to demolish the rest of what passes for Israel's military and key economic facilities. So that's the situation that I see. I think that the equities are such that Russia and China have real big stakes in this issue and that they will finally prevail on Trump if he has any ounce of sense left, rather than his pretty much succumbing again to Netanyahu. As you may know, I'm an outlier in thinking that Netanyahu did mousetrap Trump. That Trump, however, naively said, "Oh, we're doing real good negotiations." That wasn't part of a deception. Trump thought that would work, and all of a sudden it didn't all of a sudden, his advisor said, "Look, Mr. Trump, look at this TV. Look at the Israelis have free reign in Iran. Look, look, for 8 hours they had free reign." Trump goes, has a nap or has a sleep, drinks some more Diet Coke, wakes up, and he says, "Excellent, excellent. I'm all in. I know about this. I know everything." End quote. Okay. Uh-oh. Then the Iranians fix their air defense. Oh my God. And then the Israelis start to lose. And what does Trump say then? "I didn't know anything about this. This is, I'm on Israel's side." And then, as you portrayed the rest of the scenario there, all of a sudden Trump jumps in with both feet after saying, "Well, no, we're going to wait 2 weeks." How do you explain that? Abject duplicity? Oh, in my view, it's just as likely that Trump was told by the Israelis, "Look, we're winning on this thing. We're going to prevail, but it looks like the Iranians are building up these hypersonic missiles to the point where we might be on our backs in 2 weeks." Oh my God. So now or never, Mr. Trump, please, a limited strike. But you can make the point that U.S. forces are nearly unlimited in their strength. Interesting, isn't it? A limited strike on nuclear facilities. And then we could talk all about, the justification for this, and that can be very brief because the answer is there is no justification at all for what Trump did in joining Netanyahu in bombing a country that was no danger at all to the United States of America.
Yeah, I get also the impression in the beginning that when he suddenly broke ranks with Marco Rubio, who said, the U.S. had nothing to do with this, was because the Iranians were so overwhelmed in the first 2 hours when their air defenses were down. It looked like this was going to be perhaps a successful decapitation strike, and I guess Trump didn't want to, get left out. If you didn't know about the attack, you can't take credit for the victory. And as you said, they didn't go as planned, and then they take a step back again. It's I try not to listen to what he says, but rather what actions it entails. But
Yeah, I just think that for him to have said, "Oh my God, what have the Israelis done? I didn't know a damn thing. This is a big surprise to me." That would have been just too embarrassing at the time. The more so because I take it you agree with me that he was informed by the judgment that Iranians' defenses were kaput and that this was an excellent exercise of a preemptive strike. So, yeah, I think it would just been too embarrassing for him to say, "Well, BB never told me about anything." But I think, now, who knows? These things are really speculative. I know I'm an outlier on this. I'm glad you're also an outlier to an extent. But it has to do with what happens now. And I just suggest that if it was the classic kind of mousetrap, there comes a time when even Trump, however close he feels to Netanyahu, nobody likes to be mousetrapped on such important issues. So if it was a mousetrap, I would just suggest that will inform Trump's thinking going ahead. And maybe his support for Netanyahu won't be so knee-jerk or automatic as it has been heretofore.
but to explain the last shift, because the argument was that he would only accept a capitulation or a complete surrender of Iran, and then of course the U.S. had this strike in which it claimed the nuclear facilities were obliterated. There's reason to doubt this is correct, but how did you go from this to suddenly calling for a quick end to the war? Because, well, my impression was that, well, he also needed an excuse, I guess, because there's a huge domestic opposition to this war. The Gulf states might be fearful of what they might risk if they would get dragged into this as well, um, given they're very vulnerable and exposed. But also, as you suggested, the weapon systems aren't really there. We've been, sending all the weapon systems to Ukraine for so long. The Israelis were also reportedly running out of intercepted missiles. This is something even the Wall Street Journal reported, that the interception rate was dropping radically. And also the US doesn't have unlimited weaponry either. So is this was this simply an excuse to end the war, to call it mission accomplished?
Well, I think the facts on the ground speak toward that explanation. There's an expression, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Well, we were robbing Peter Zelensky to pay Paul Netanyahu. I mean, some of those Patriot missiles, they were either on their way to or were already in Ukraine. I said, no, bring them to Israel. Beside that, they don't work against hypersonic missiles. So I think, and this is speculative, that Trump finally was given a decent briefing, perhaps by the Joint Chiefs, perhaps by Tulsi Gabbard, and told, look, if you wait 2 weeks now, you won't have much of Israel left. Okay. Israel is in dire straits. Nobody knows that, not even you, because you watch Fox News, Mr. President. But I'm telling you that some of their major airfields and facilities have been demolished, their oil terminals as well. Uh, they don't have 2 weeks. See what you can do to stop this thing now. I know you said 2 weeks, but everybody knows you change your mind very frequently. Do it now. That's how I reconstruct it. Uh, Maybe there are other theories. Perhaps you have one, Glenn.
Well, I was, I did have the thought though that when he said, we completely obliterated the nuclear program, it's destroyed in its entirety. It's, on the one hand, you can interpret this as the regular bombastic, well, speech patterns of President Trump. He brags a lot. Everyone knows that everything he says isn't true. He likes the big bombastic language. However, I thought it was interesting because if you then argue that there is no more Iranian nuclear program, everything is destroyed, and the war allegedly was about the nuclear program, isn't that a good reason to end the war? And but also what he might not have, anticipated, if there is no nuclear weapons program anymore, why do you need negotiations then? Why do you need the IAEA? Why, it's I'm, I don't know. It looks like he might have taken some of the argument away from Netanyahu. Why? Because the argument is that the reason behind this war was to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. This is also what Washington's been saying. But if it's mission accomplished, the banner's already up. Um, it's a good way of finishing the war as well. So I don't know. After the bombing, I did look at it, and I was wondering, there's two possible pathways here. Either the U.S. would wait for Iran to retaliate, and then the U.S. would then escalate further. So again, use this as an excuse to further escalate and go for full war regime change in Iran, or they would use the attack as an opportunity to end the war. And once I guess the Iranian attack on Qatar as well was limited in terms of damage, it had an opportunity for the Americans as well to essentially absorb the punishment and not having to retaliate and just put an end to the whole thing. But I'm not sure if, if that's the right assessment. But it does appear that Israel is not really ready to end the war, the willingness, but they seem to be forced in this direction now.
Yeah. Now, if Trump has that kind of influence over Israel, and it's always a guessing game as to who has more influence over whom, then the ceasefire may hold for a while. After all, Israel needs to replenish and have better ways to try, and I emphasize try to defend itself. Um, Iran's got plenty of those missiles now. They don't need the ceasefire. They can go ahead. I think the Iranians are being advised by the Chinese and by the Russians, look, you have the upper hand. It may be a little difficult for you to stop right now, given the provocation, but it's going to take the Israelis months to come up with more of the weaponry that they need. And even then, they can't defend against your hypersonic missile. So cool it a little while, see what we can do. Now, you mentioned Qatar. Uh, I was on yesterday with Al Jazeera, right? They're in Doha, capital of Qatar, and there was some confusion. They couldn't send me the link so we could go on Zoom, and finally I in panic called them, and I got a message back, and it sounded like this. Glenn, listen carefully. They they played me a minute and a half of what was going on outside their window. They were 30 miles, they told me, from Al-Adid, the U.S. air 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 airfield, and, they didn't know what was gonna happen, but I was cut short on my interview when their foreign minister came on to tell the world what Qatar and everyone else had arranged. So, uh, the business really comes down to what the US and Israel were trying to do. It had nothing to do, I'm sorry to shock people if I am, had nothing to do with uranium enrichment. It had nothing to do with an Iranian attempt to build a nuclear weapon. It had to do with regime change. Now, was that naive to think that they would attack Iran and the Iranian people will rise up and say, "Yeah, that was a good thing. We support that and overthrow their government"? Well, I don't know. Naive isn't the word. That would be delusional. But the opposite happened. Okay. Now, with respect to the nuclear program, now, if I were Khamenei, of course, I'm not quite as religious as the Ayatollah, but if I were he, I would be besieged by many people say, well, I mean, hello, do you need any more persuasion now that we need to have a nuclear weapon? That'll only take a couple of months to do it. We have the enriched uranium. Would you please reverse that religious edict, the fatwa, that prohibits us from doing that? And I don't know what he'd say. Does he need to do that? No. But the fly in the ointment is this. If the battle continues and Netanyahu is still losing, as he will manifestly do if it goes on for the next couple of weeks, he will resort to thinking about using his nuclear weapons. On that aspect, the United States, Russia, China, even Iran are united in saying, my God, that would be the worst thing to have happen. Would Netanyahu do this? Well, I don't hold a lot of respect for Netanyahu. I think a lot of his motivation right now is to stay out of jail. This government almost fell just 10 days ago, just before he launched this big attack on Iran. It almost fell. What would that mean? He'd be out of office. He'd be in jail in that bridal suite that he and his wife are destined to occupy if he comes out of power. So, am I saying that personal considerations like staying out of jail uh, might incite a person like Netanyahu to start a regional war? I guess I am saying that, Glenn, because I think that's probable. This is a fellow who's waging genocide. There have been a couple of 100,000 Gazans already dead or severely wounded or starved to death by this same guy. Now, would he resort to using nuclear weapons in extremis? If I were asked that question, I'll ask myself right now. Yeah, I think I would. My God. Would would Trump be able to prevent that? No, I don't think he could. So the supreme value here, in my view, is for the major powers of the world to tamp this damn thing down before it becomes such a disastrous defeat for Israel that Netanyahu, if only to stay out of jail, but also to call on the only card he has left in the hole, the Samson option. You remember the Bible? Samson pulls down the temple, everything else, uh, to you know to make sure that the Philistines don't get him or whatever it was. Would he do that? I don't know, but I think there are sensible people in this world, even in Washington, although they probably number on the fingers of one hand. But there are people around who know what nuclear war is, and thankfully, Tulsi Gabbard is one of those. So maybe good sense will prevail, and maybe that's what we'll see now after Trump has bragged about bringing about a ceasefire. I don't know. I really, I really appreciate this chance to think aloud about this because sometimes I hear myself saying things that I hadn't thought before, and sometimes I even agree with them.
Well, it's interesting after all this chaos, it might be easier to make some sense of it. But on the other hand, is this thing over? Because it appears not just Trump, but many of his entourage would be interested in the regime change in Iran. They didn't get what they wanted. The idea that now there's going to be peace on earth, they're going to embrace Iran, given that well, allegedly their entire nuclear program is gone. Um, it just with all the deceptions, continuous deception. Yeah, how likely is it that this ceasefire will necessarily last? I mean, I would see an interest in it to keeping it going now, given that the U.S. is not ready for a big war with Iran. Israel has exhausted itself
Right.
very much so. So it's not a good idea to pursue a war you can't win. But in the medium to long term, I have a hard time believing that the United States is done with Iran.
Well, done with Israel, I would put it that way. It is always a puzzlement to me how much influence Israel has over a major superpower like our country, the United States. But one cannot discount that the Netanyahu has something on Trump, and of course the Zionists do that he will act irrationally, as he appeared to do earlier this week. Really hard to tell how this will come out, but I think you're quite right on focusing on the mid and longer term. A ceasefire is not going to last, in my view. They never do. I mean, look at the ones with Hamas. Look at the ones that Israel and the U.S. have helped to facilitate, so to speak, for a little while in the Middle East. So, yeah, it all depends on how much control Trump has over not only his own government. I think there were people within his own government that winked at Netanyahu and Dermer and all those other fellows. Said, "Look, you start this thing. Uh, we've got we've got ways, electronic ways to suppress Iran's defense. Then you take the president down to the White House Situation Room where they have that big screen and show him. Whoo, yep. Then he'll be in there with both feet, which he fell for. Then, as I say, several hours later, oh no, I didn't know anything. So uh, unpredictability is his hallmark. I don't know what he'll do, but I think that we should probably at this point link this discussion to what's going to open tomorrow in full, and that is the NATO summit in The Hague. Um, how will this all impact on? Well, let's take the what I call the coalition of the brain dead: the Merz, Macron, Stammer, that fellow from Poland. Uh, how are they going to react to all this? It diverts attention from what they really want, and to continue the war against Russia in Ukraine. I kind of think that there's a good possibility that Putin has been in touch with Trump on the phone. They've said, look, I know you're pretty good at making deals. We'd like to have a deal here. You're meeting with these Europeans there in NATO tomorrow and the next day. Why don't you cool it? Why don't you tell them what you really think about Ukraine? And why don't you tell them that you will not supply any more weapons or money to the Ukrainian government as it is now constituted? Do you have the guts to do that, Donald? Um, okay. Well, then would you ask the Iranians not to destroy what's left of Israel? Well, yeah, well, it's a deal. This kind of thing is not to be ruled out. I think they are in touch, and I think they can negotiate one with the other, despite the fact that the world, and appropriately so, has no trust at all in Trump anymore. It doesn't matter if there's real trust between Putin and Trump. They share. They share an overarching desire to have a decent relationship between our two countries, irrespective of trust. Doverai, no proverai. Trust but verify, okay? So these kinds of things can be verified even in a negotiating sense where if the US comes forward and says, okay, you coalition of the brain dead, you think you can supply Ukraine with weapons and other support so that they can fight to the last Ukrainian? Okay, over to you. We're out of there. No more arms and no more no more money. Now, if Trump says that, uh, NATO is going to be sort of shattered. Okay, what are they going to do? Because not everybody is brain dead. I mean, you have the Hungarians, you have the Slovaks, you have lots of people say, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" So this may be, and you can quote me on this, Glenn, the last summit meeting of NATO. Uh, Article 15, or Article 5, really, doesn't matter anymore. I don't think anybody thinks that the U.S. would be prepared to exchange the obliteration of Washington or New York for for Berlin or Moscow if it was a nuclear exchange. So it was Article 5 dead, and the Europeans being prancing around as though they still had some power. Well, I think that Trump may be just cruel enough to say, okay, prance around, without our weaponry and without our money.
So you think the Article 5 has been weakened significantly to the point that the Russians don't take it as serious anymore?
Well, the Russians have to sort of take it as seriously as it could be taken. It's a question of what the Europeans think. I can't see. Again, it's hard to look for sane leaders among the coalition of the brain dead, but there are other European leaders that say, my God, NATO was to protect us from the Soviet Union. Now, yeah, wait a second. The Soviet Union fell apart in 1990, 1991. Warsaw Pact was dissolved. Why didn't we dissolve NATO? Well, there are lots of reasons for that. Bureaucratic reasons and all kinds of pretensions to great power chauvinism and the fact that, okay, we're still a great alliance, but it has no teeth anymore because there's a rapprochement between Trump and Putin, even amid this crisis in Iran and Israel, that neither of them wants to give up. And as the Europeans look on and they say, well, my God, what's likely to happen? Now, those Germans, 2 summits ago, those Germans went off alone and concluded a deal with the United States where they're going to put intermediate range nuclear capable missiles in Germany next year, 2026. That was irrespective of NATO. That was a bilateral deal. And when we asked Scholz, chancellor at the time, how'd that come about? He said, well, The Americans wanted to do this, and we said, okay, we approve. Well, that will change the whole strategic situation in Central Europe. It will bring back the situation that existed before before the INF Treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which I would remind our audience destroyed, broke apart, hacked apart an entire class of intermediate and shorter range ballistic missiles in Western Europe and in Russia. My God, obliterated, first time in history. They were. Obliterators is right in that case. I looked up the etymology of obliterate. It comes from the Latin word literare, okay? Op, to add emphasis. Literare means erase. It means to sort of blot out, okay? So that was overstatement by Trump, of course, but it applies here. We have to take into account is that there are smart West Europeans that realize that the European Union not good for each country anymore. It was a nice idea, okay, but it devolved into kind of a centralized bureaucracy that does no good to any of those nations. And then NATO, well, NATO is a vestigial organ. And if we let if the Germans, here's NATO thinking, if we let the Germans put medium range ballistic missiles in Germany ready to hit Russia, well, Russia's going to, if they don't already have them, they'll have equivalent missiles. We'll be back to the time before the INF Treaty, and we will be targets as well. Do we think that if Germany and Russia get into an exchange of intermediate ballistic missiles, that the United States is going to say, oh, well, wait a second, Article 5, or Europeans will say, oh, Article 5, Article 5? If they do, I think there's enough doubt that the U.S. would honor whatever's left of Article 5 of the NATO treaty. They can't be so delusional. And having said that, I correct myself. They could be so delusional, but then it would come, as the Chinese used to say, then it would come to a no good end.
Well, there is some delusion on this continent or in Europe. It's quite astonishing to see, for example, the European Union, where during the conflict now or war with Iran, they come out with these statements as if, the world has been waiting, the earth will tremble as the EU makes its statements. It's just, there's nothing there. And no one's taking it serious anymore. The Americans do not care what the Europeans say. The Russians don't care. Even the Iranians don't really care that much anymore. It's just, all the power, all the influence, what used to be some moral authority, everything is gone. But when you see the media on this continent, it's as if the world still waits to hear what the Europeans will say, and they will carefully listen. It's very strange. I don't think. I do think there's a huge denial. They don't realize how irrelevant they have made themselves. But
That's right, Glenn. Let me chip in here. It's a bit noir here. Now, you have been around long enough to remember that for decades since the Russian Revolution, the Russians had one main enemy, Glavny Vrak, obviously the United States of America. Guess what? There have been polls, substantial, respectable polls in Russia now. The U.S. has lost its place at the Glavny Vrak. It's no longer the main enemy. Guess who is? Germany. Then Ukraine. It goes down the list. And it's a substantial shift. Now, okay, that's a good poll, but it's only a poll. But what does it really mean? I mean, my whole raison d'etre in analyzing Soviet foreign policy and trying to anticipate what the Soviets might do in a dangerous way or in a political way, well, that was based on we being the Glavny Vrak. Okay. We're not the Glavny Vrak anymore. What does that mean? It has implications. It means that Russians have been accustomed to looking at this nascent rapprochement as something good. Putin has said it's something good. Putin has actually gone way out on a limb and he says, I think we can trust us. Yeah, I think we can trust Donald Trump. I think he is sincere in wishing peace in Ukraine. Now, that was 2 months ago. I don't think Putin's going to talk about trust right now. I think he's very much offended, but the main goal is still there. Now, don't ask me to explain why precisely it is that Russia and the US have seen it fit to put this as their dominant backdrop here, their main goal, okay? Rapprochement or even détente, but they have, okay? And the fact that they have has to be entered into any calculations as to what's going to happen. Now, I think tomorrow will be really, really important with respect to Europe and with respect to NATO and even the EU. There's no telling what Trump will do. He's unpredictable. Look what he did to the G7. He comes in with the guns blazing. What does he say? He says, how come this is G7? Should be G8. Who kicked the Russians out of here? And the Chinese, they should be here too. What's going on here? And,
He blasts Macron on the way out by criticizing Macron's comment. Macron suggesting Trump was going to work on a ceasefire. He doesn't know what he's talking about. His attention.
I'm almost.
I mean, it's a bit wild. I'm trying to look for some order in the chaos, if there's some plan behind it. But sometimes it does look like it's but there's nothing there. Well, it didn't make any sense to go after France in this way or to go after Macron. It's just I'm wondering what I'm no fan of Macron, but what has to be a purpose behind these things, and I didn't see the purpose.
That's a good point. Now, I don't feel sorry for Macron. He's unfeel sorry for in my but here he is, his wife sitting him in the face. Trump hits him in the face rhetorically. Poor guy. Okay. Now you asked a really good question right now, and I just got carried away with this comical uh, theater here. What was it, Glenn, that you were just getting into? It sounds very important.
Oh, no, I forgot.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, I did want to move on to something about the intelligence community because you mentioned before Marco Rubio. He made the point that what the intelligence community said was irrelevant. But Trump said something similar because he was asked by a journalist, your own intelligence community tells you that they're not working on a nuclear weapon. And he says, well, my intelligence agencies are wrong. But, you, with, almost 3 decades in the CIA, you've seen, how the intelligence communities feed the administration. What does this actually mean? Because not only is the government or the executive branch dismissive now of the intelligence community, but you also see now the head, Tulsi Gabbard, in the intelligence community, essentially shifting her whole position to adjust to the government. So well, she walked away from what she had previously said in order to give her support to Trump's assertion that Iran might get a nuclear weapon, even though she dismissed it only a few weeks earlier. So what does this mean when this relationship breaks down between an independent intelligence agency and the executive branch who's supposed to act on this?
Uh, Sometimes there's some benefit for having been around a long time. Back before the war on Iraq, the intelligence analysis served up by my former colleagues I had just retired a few years before, was corrupted to the point where it was used to justify a war of aggression, defined by Nuremberg as the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole. Think torture and all that business. Okay. Now, no one was held accountable. Those former colleagues of mine got cash bonuses. It was totally corrupted. Even the analysis division, which I had hoped could escape the corruption of the operations division, which is a whole different risk. Okay. Now, somebody got it into their mind, somebody respectable who said, look, the neocons are beating their breasts now and they're saying real men go to Tehran. So, my God, are we going to get another meretricious estimate on Iran to justify going after Iran? Now, I know a little bit about this because I worked not only as a CIA analyst, but also in an intelligence community role as Deputy National Intelligence Officer. Okay. We ran the estimates. I ran two all by myself. In other words, you chaired the estimate, you brought it before the board of 12 or 16 then chiefs of the intelligence agencies, and then you put it out as the document that everyone should respect and believe. Now, they couldn't believe the one that was done on the 1st of October, 2002 to justify war against Iraq. So, with this in mind, some people in Congress and elsewhere said, look, we need an honest estimate on Iran before Bush, Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice go after Iran to make Netanyahu happy. Yeah, good idea. How are we going to do this? Well, we have to find a good manager of this. Okay, well, they spent a month looking through the CIA. There was no one of managerial aptitude or consequence that they could depend on to run an honest estimate. They went to the State Department to Tom Finger, who was head of State Department Intelligence, an assistant secretary, very high-level guy, okay? He took copious footnotes in October of 2002 because he didn't agree with the weapons of mass destruction and all that stuff. So they asked him, Tom, would you come in and do an estimate? And he said, are you kidding? I'm so sick of those people. No, forget about it. I'm going to retire. Well, they prevailed on him. They said, look, you take your own people in, you're honest people. We'll give you a whole year to do it. We will mandate it through Congress. He said, okay. And he worked all during 2007, during which there were some very fortuitous intelligence coups that came to him. He evaluated them, and the principal judgment released by Congress, mind you, they were the requester. Okay, that's key. In November 2007, Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. It stopped working on a nuclear weapon in late 2003 and has not resumed work. We say that unanimously and with great confidence, period. Okay. Whoa. That's the only estimate in my knowledge of all our estimates. And I pretty much know, well, I know someone from 1963 and I've done some research. And the only time a national intelligence estimate prevented a war. And how do I know that? Because Junior Bush goes to Israel in January 2008 and says, I don't agree with that estimate. I think they're wrong. I think that Iran is making a nuclear. I have never. And then he writes in his book, Decision Points. Don't buy it. It's in the libraries, some libraries. I don't forget what page it is, but he must have written to himself. He says, this was a bummer. This was an eye catcher. Well, how could I, and this is a quote, how could I justify attacking the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. quote, end quote. Now, what does that mean? That means that a national intelligence estimate was a thing that people paid attention to, especially since it went against the conventional wisdom, especially because it was honest. So, up to this day, every year, that judgment has been reaffirmed in official documents, the threat assessment that happens most recently last March. Same words, okay? Even Tulsi Gabbard added this. She said there's no evidence that the supreme leader has reversed his fatwa, his edict against developing a nuclear weapon, as though that matters. Well, it does matter, okay? So, what happens now? Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, Rubio says irrelevant. Doesn't matter what they're it says. So it's even worse than during Iraq, where there was a. It's even worse than during the attempt to do Iran, and certainly when doing Iraq. So the intelligence community has been put by the side. At Tulsi Gabbard, there's a good argument for her staying on. I mean, she's the only one with any sense. I appeal to her to quit on the spot as soon as this happens to defend whatever's left of her integrity. But no, she's trimmed her sails and she said, yeah, but I also said this, I also said that, I also said they're refining but refining is not a nuclear weapon, for God's sake. That's the conflation here. People say, oh, refining. They're refining above what they need to. Yeah, they are. Okay. Are they permitted to do that? Yes. Is it a good idea to do that? Turns out, no. Why? The Iranians thought they could use that as a bargaining chip. Trump and Witkoff said, no, you got to stop all enrichment. The Russians said, well, okay, look, we'll take the highly refined enrichment. So it was a war of choice, a war for regime change. So the distinction we're trying to make here is that at least as back in 2007 and 2008, an honest intelligence judgment prevented a war of aggression against Iran, which is exactly what has happened within the last 10 days by Israel and the United States. Now, it doesn't matter what the intelligence people says. And not only does it not matter, it's said by the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State, the same person, Marco Rubio of all people. It's irrelevant, doesn't matter. And there's a little puerile exchange with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation. I mean, it's sort of like a cafeteria food fight in junior high school. Yes, I didn't know it. I said, no, you don't. I mean, so disreputable. So, Rubio and maybe Trump. I don't think Trump, but Rubio thinks he's Henry Kissinger, for God's sake. Henry Kissinger occupied both positions. Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and Secretary of State. Now, let me just say that Marco Rubio is no Henry Kissinger. I think that's clear.
I agree, but it's interesting that that the findings of the intelligence agencies that were seen very openly, to paraphrase Bush, as a way to legitimize the attack, which suggests, the reason for attacking is something very different than what is legitimizing it. And this is something you've seen throughout this as well. I mean, they've been very open about what the reasoning for attacking, which is the nuclear program, but then they have to deceive a lot. They have to refer to the enrichment levels, even though they know that Iran uses being a threshold state as a bargaining power. They and then they obviously have this key objective on the side, which is regime change, which they don't hide very well. And so it is fascinating when presidents like Bush uses the words, legitimize. That is, how else would we have an excuse to do this?
Yeah, Glenn, I memorized Iraq. I was so distraught to see what my former colleague were doing that I wrote several papers, one a big chapter in a collection. But suffice it to say, that, God, I've lost my train of thought. I'm getting what Dmitry Peskov calls emotionally overwrought, talking about what Trump had just said. Uh, I guess, what was I trying to, oh, yeah. What I was trying to say is this. When I memorized all this stuff, there were very key developments that I keyed into, and I still remember, old as I am. One is that Bush decided to make war on Iraq in the summer of 2002. There was no national intelligence estimate on Iraq at that time. The head of the Senate Committee on Intelligence asked the Bush administration, "Hey, if you want Congress to vote on a war against Iraq, we must have a national intelligence estimate. We're not going to do it." His name was Graham, Senator Graham from Florida. Oh my God. Well, what happened then? That's when Condoleezza got up and talked about the first sign we'll have that Saddam Hussein has a nuclear weapon is a mushroom cloud. You want that to happen? Is that it? Now, on the 20th of July, 2002, the head of British intelligence, his name was and is Sir Richard Dearlove. Blair, the prime minister, said to Dearlove, "Look, I'm talking with George Bush on the phone every week, but there's no substitute for eye-to-eye contact. You go talk to George Tenet, who's his director of Central Intelligence. He's very close to Bush. You go find out what Bush is thinking by asking George Tenet. He's very loquacious, and he'll tell you." Okay, so Tenet resisted the trip, but Bush had received Sir Richard Dearlove, and he did so on the 20th of July, 2022. Okay, so now what happened there? Well, I know what happened. I had friends who were there, but they didn't tell me what happened. Guess who told me what happened? Sir Richard Dearlove, because 3 days later, he appeared at a briefing at 10 Downing Street with all the big shots, okay, and Blair, and he said this: "George Tenet told me that Bush had decided to make war on Iraq. It will be justified by the connection between weapons of mass destruction and terrorism." Translation: we're going to say that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and is give them to terrorists. Last sentence, but the facts and the figures are being fixed to suit the policy. Now, somebody leaked those minutes to I think it was the London Observer, for God's sake, in 2005. Never have I seen such documented impudence here. The facts and the facts are being fixed around the policy. Okay. So there it is in black and white. Now, we have a similar rationale now being propounded by some people in the Trump administration. What are they saying? They're saying that, in this case, not Saddam Hussein, but the Ayatollah or the Iranians have a nuclear weapon, or they're just a couple of weeks away from a nuclear weapon. And what are you going to do with it? They're going to give it to terrorists. I mean, hello. You don't have to be around more than 30 years to see that's a replay of what worked. Well, it worked really well last time. So the key here is that the American media is just beyond repair. That's why I always love to get on somebody's show like yours. A sensible discussion can ensue. I hope that has happened now. And, the bright spot, if I'm looking for a silver lining, is that Margaret Brennan, we have an expression in the United States, uh, one of those big fat senators, what's his name, McConnell, was talking to a woman senator, the one from Massachusetts, whose name I'll remember in a second, and he said, "I was talking to her, and she kept talking back, and nevertheless, she persisted." So quote, "Nevertheless, she persisted." Well, nevertheless, Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation last Sunday persisted, and she made a fool out of Marco Rubio. And it just sort of highlighted the kinds of clowns that are running our policy now. And for them to have the opportunity to tell people, well, look, not only are they about to get a nuclear weapon, they're going to give it to terrorists. And there's a whole new generation that doesn't remember this happened before. Well, the silver lining, nevertheless, she persisted. Good for you, Margaret Brennan. That's a sign, and the other little signs that even the mainstream media are beginning to think, "Well, my God, are we going to go through this again and then have to try to justify ourselves?" Yeah, nobody's held accountable last time, but last little message here. Yeah, nobody held accountable after the war was over. After, well, things were still going on, but around 2007 in Iraq, main battle's over. The head of the op-ed section of the Washington Post, what was his name? I'll think of it in a second. He goes up to the Columbia School of Journalism. Oh, a prestigious place, And they say, now, tell us, editor of the op-ed section of the Washington Post. One of the students says, you published op-eds, 80% of which said as flat fact that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. How do you explain that? And the editor says, well, if it weren't true, we probably shouldn't have said it. End quote. Now, Robert Perry, my mentor in journalism, turned to me. We heard that at the same time, and he said, Ray, I thought that was sort of like a cardinal principle of journalism. If something's not so, you're not supposed to say it is so. Oh my God. And there was there's no sense of reaction to this guy. So they got away with murder, lots of murders. Okay. Will they get away with murder this time? Well, there are some people, Margaret Brennan among them, that are willing to ask some questions now. Maybe I'm gilding the lily, but I think there's some hope, and hopefully millions of people are watching us right now, Glenn, and we'll get the real word. I hope so.
I I miss at least the days when there was they had some shame when they tried to deceive that at least put some more effort into covering it up. But anyway, so thank you so much, Ray. It's excellent, always excellent to speak with you. So I hope you can come back again soon.
Well, when I speak with you, Glenn, I too learn a lot. So thanks for inviting me.